It is believed that John Taylor was one of the first people back in the 1830s to ever write about how pi was incorporated in the Great Pyramid. Yet if we actually look back, Newton himself had claimed that he thought the Great Pyramid incorporated the size of the Earth in it somehow. In a modern day, figuring out what a cubit is, their ancient measurements and so on, we have found a huge connection which shows that this was correct. What it actually shows is not the circumference of the Earth only, but it shows more mathematics caught up in it. Makes one wonder what they actually did and were thinking of to incorporate so many sacred geometry numbers into it at once. I've said in the past many times, I felt like what they did here was create something that once we finally were able to understand what they did, we would know how great of a people they once were. The very first dynastic Egyptians, which doesn't make very much sense whenever we have our common idea that they just showed up like out of popcorn and they were just living in huts and doing some stuff out of wood, and then all of a sudden somebody cut a rock and next thing you know they've got pyramids all over the place. But they also contain all of this sacred geometry incorporated inside of them, and I've tried to show this in a bunch of different ways. I think it gets overwhelming once you start to show too many things at one time. But it incorporates pi, that 3.14197, whatever. They do it in a way that's basically 22 over 7, or 220 over 72, I believe, is even more accurate. The 22 over 7 that they use in this actually puts them at 4 thousandths off of being pi, and of course we go 3.1419, that's tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, so on. People have now figured out by measuring and getting the surface area of this that they actually incorporate in the faces of the Great Pyramid another representation of phi. That would make sense, I guess, whenever you have to have everything to be exactly the same all the way around. But we know that it has a dent inside of it, which is very strange. There are so many calculations caught up in the Great Pyramid that equate to sacred geometry, it's beyond belief. It takes a few times to grasp a hold of it, and then you try to get the idea of how they put it all together, and I'll tell you that part of it just comes naturally from the sacred measurements of things, from the smallest of things all the way up to the largest of things in galaxies. We talked recently how they came out with a protractor, and here you can see an actual protractor shape that's in it here. Hopefully you can see the dotted line in the Vesica Pisces that's trapped in the middle of it, because this is looking at it sideways. Not only can you lay it out like this in architecture and put a Vesica Pisces over it in height-wise, which I'll show you in just a second, and get everything in the shape, but inside of it is trapped a sacred pyramid shape. I showed that a long time ago, I guess 2.5, 3 years ago now, before I got into the sacred geometry totally with you, trying to give you pieces at a time so it wasn't so overwhelming, because some of the shows I did were very overwhelming. Some also were, well, that one with Donald Duck in it showed you that they used to teach this to kids with old projectors, with old movie reels and everything when I was a kid. And I don't think they even refer to them having this type of knowledge nowadays. They act all ambiguous about it. It's crazy. But you can see here where they've taken and squared the circle like we talked about before, and if you double in the square of the circle on the other ratio that's here, You end up chopping the top off of it and it looks like our dollar bill in some way. People have found so many measurements inside of this. It's take me a long time to show you what all these people have showed. And this isn't a side reference of one face, but it does it on every side. In fact, this is 3D. You can actually look over the top of this and the Fourth Dynasty Complex, which I did a series on, or 2 different videos, making sure I had enough of the information and stuff that I left out in the first one, showing you the people that were enthralled and entailed in this and who did what. Hemuinu, the architect of the Great Pyramid, and where they've got it laid out here, lays out to a Fibonacci sequence. Crazy as much sound whenever you do all of this, didn't we show you that Hemuinu was right here in the apex? He's not in the circle of the pyramid. You'd think the pyramid would be the center of it, but it's not. It's offset. Trapped inside of that shell that goes around and around, in that sacred ratio that's there. If I back out and look at it, you can probably see, maybe in this representation here, how there is an outer, let me get that right, sorry guys. You can get an outer and an inner Vesica Pisces. You can see the overall golden one, the red in the center with the pink diamond in the middle of it. That's a diamond shape that we know, right? Actually, the original diamond was the pyramid. Diamond has to do with Dia and the gods. But you can see that shape recreated here and over the top of the whole thing. You take the Vesica Pisces and draw it all out in its double form, which we have in the United States here with the Washington Monument, with it poking up from right here and the 2 circles overcrossing each other. You end up making a pyramid. That's inside 3D in all of these and making points. These points actually connect to things too if we were to draw the whole thing out. It gets overwhelming. It starts to look something like this, if you can see the swirls over the top of everything. But that is only the 4 faces. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 put over the top of each other, done with a computer. If you were to put the thing in the over top and how it fits inside of itself, you almost couldn't discern the lines. Well, you could kind of. It looked like a weird spirograph zodiac pattern here if you took the pyramid out of it and just looked at it on black and white. Another representation where you can find this same type of thing is a Merkaba type symbol here. And it's showing you trapped inside of it in a 3D way in the circles of the pie. Pie like you eat, not like the pie we're talking about here. But even trapped inside of the hex, that's a pyramid. Those are pyramids. Each one has slightly different angles. So do the pyramids. So does this one over here on the right that has a sacred flower of life etched into it and an upside down pyramid. If they were to have etched that upside down from what you see it right now, would you see the pyramid easier in the center of it? Can you now see that there's one here, one there, and one there? Can you also see that even though there's one here, there's a bigger one over the whole thing? Can you see that kind of matches to the whole size of the thing? Crazy, isn't it? Well, but you could say that's just something in designs, right? It's just designs. No, it's not. I've often thought that somebody playing around with a protractor and doing things like that probably led them to this idea that's here. But if you get one edge of it, it's 1/11th of a mile. That doesn't necessarily make so much sense to somebody. But if you look at the edges here and the 756 feet that are here, if you times that times 4, that goes all the way around it, and you were to take that and peel it out as a long line, right? 1, 2, 3, and that's a long line all the way out here now. That becomes the same distance as 1/360th of 1 degree of longitude and latitude on our planet. And if you thought it was the equator, that would be fantastic, but it's actually on the longitude or the latitude that the Great Pyramid's on. When you see the longitude and latitude lines running up, you can tell that they slightly get smaller as they go up, and it's not on the equator, it's up just a little bit. What's the measurements of that part right there? It's exactly what is the perimeter of this. Talked before about how that had to be the size of it, that they couldn't have just made something 20 foot tall. It had to fit all of the things into it to be right. It had to be this. And it's still very tiny. It's based on a number based on 432, well, 43,200. But that in increments: 432, 4,320, 43,200, 4,320,000. It keeps going. In fact, there are measurements of the sun, and this is all based on sun worship, and they can find the distance of the sun. People try to say that they didn't know the world was round, and that the first person to figure that really out was a Greek man named Eratosthenes. And him, by reading in the Library of Alexandria, was able to discern what he saw in some Egyptian writing, because Eratosthenes was a curator of the Great Library of Alexandria, which took people's knowledge from all over the place, and by looking through it and finding connections, he had found out a story that was an example of how you could use and do this math if you wanted to. And what it was that on the longest day of the year, with the sun shining down directly here on it, that there would be no shadow to that stick up in Syene, but back over here there would be a little bit of a shadow if this was a ball, because this shines directly down on the stick, but over here it's going to create a little shadow. And in measuring that shadow and then having somebody walk from here to here and pace it off in miles, which is 1,000 human paces, and back again, and make sure that it was correct, they were able to discern that there's about 8 degrees of separation there, and whenever you have shadow, and whenever you have that times the size of the measurement from Syene, which I believe was something like 800 miles, that what he equated it out as is roughly the size of Earth, in fact incredibly close to it. But apparently that was just to kind of get close to it, because the actual pyramid is much closer, just like it faces true north, just like it's the belly button of the Earth. So as John Taylor wrote it down before, like we said, but there's so much mathematics that only people in a modern day using modern mathematics are finding out that they use trigonometry, forms of calculus, things that we credit to people much, much later, but it seemed to have happened in a time much, much before. Sacred geometry and math is all written around ancient Egypt and all in the ancient societies that there are. And they knew the size of the Earth long before we found out the size of the Earth and the fact that they knew the size of the Earth. I think it's a pretty incredible find, but then to figure out that they inside of it had pi and phi and these other sacred measurements, which some of them are actually the measurements of stars and how far they are apart in relation to each other, hooking up with sacred geometry. The heavens and the earth is one in a way that's in harmony with the earth, in sizes and shapes that they could see commonly found in everything as it naturally happened by the Creator itself, all by itself. Therefore, they mimic that to stay within that. Some of our architecture still goes along with this concept. Some of it's still there. But it makes you wonder what all they knew. And I've tried to show you quite a few things that the ancient Egyptians knew, and I'm still telling you we don't know it all. And we're still left in awe of some of the statuary that they built, and of course the Great Pyramid itself. I often thought of if they didn't have the Great Pyramids there, but everything else, would people care as much? Isn't that thing just a shining beacon through all of mankind? Didn't everything fall apart? Now in a modern day, we're able to look back and see that these people built the pyramids here had a lot more going on than we gave credit for. In fact, when we gave them credit, like having pi and phi even in it, that's nowhere near the end of the nth degree of what it contains and the size of the earth and so on. Anyhow, let me know what you think downstairs. We're getting on to the next one. Peace.